The room is frozen. 1,000 lights blink from the cameras like a constellation of judgment. Kash Patel sits rigid behind the microphone, his jaw locked, eyes darting. The committee room is packed. Press, staffers, restless witnesses, all waiting for the next sound. And then it comes, Crockett's voice, sharp as glass. "Mr. Patel, are you under oath?" It isn't shouted. It's measured, precise enough to cut through the tension like a scalpel through silk. A murmur ripples across the rows behind her. Someone clears their throat. The chairman's gavel hesitates in midair. Patel blinks once, twice, and offers a half smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. The cameras zoom in. The world zooms in. He answers, too casually. "Of course, Congresswoman." Her eyes don't move. Good. Because the next thing you say will define which side of the truth you stand on. The air thickens. You can almost hear the oxygen being swallowed by anticipation. Across America, millions will later replay this moment in slow motion, fingers hovering over the replay button, whispering, "What's she about to do?" In the front row, a reporter's pen stops moving. Patel shifts in his seat, straightens his tie, and lets out a low exhale. Behind him, aides exchange looks that say everything. She's not playing defense. She's here to make history. A voiceover begins, low and cinematic. What you're about to witness isn't just another congressional hearing. It's the moment truth decided it had enough of double talk. Flash cuts, social media feeds lighting up, commentators stunned, snippets of headlines that haven't yet been written. Crockett confronts Patel, a question that silenced the room, the hearing that broke the internet. The narrator's tone tightens, but no one expected what she'd say next. Patel glances at his papers, as if the answer might be hiding in the ink. Crockett leans forward, hands clasped, gaze unwavering. The seconds stretch like hours. Silence. And then, click. The sound of a single camera shutter snaps the moment into history. Cut to black. Voiceover, quiet but electric. To understand how we got here, you need to know what led to this explosive question. The story didn't begin in that silent room. It began in a country exhausted by spin, years of hearings that led nowhere, headlines that blurred truth into theater, and officials who spoke in rehearsed half-set. The people watching from their phones and living rooms weren't just curious. They were starving for accountability. This hearing was supposed to be routine. Another day, another committee, another witness with polished answers. But on this morning, the air felt different. Every question carried the weight of something larger than politics. Kash Patel sat there not just as a witness, but as a symbol. Former official, trusted insider, master of the deflection. For years he'd moved through Washington like a man immune to gravity, untouched by the controversies that swallowed others whole. His name was whispered in back rooms, printed in headlines, praised and condemned in equal measure. And across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, a former public defender turned congresswoman, a woman who'd spent her life standing where justice was most fragile. Her posture was composed, but her eyes told another story. She wasn't here to grandstand. She was here to draw a line. The walls of the hearing room were heavy with history, portraits of men who once swore they'd uphold the truth. Some who did, others who didn't. Outside, protesters chanted faintly through the marble halls, their voices carried by conviction and fatigue. Inside, Crockett's questions sliced through the noise. "Mr. Patel," she began earlier, "you've made claims that contradict sworn testimony. Can you clarify which version of your story you want the American people to believe?" The words hung like a dare. Patel leaned back, offering a thin grin. "Congresswoman, I've always told the truth." She didn't blink, so has every man who's ever been caught lying. The audience gasped, just enough to feel alive again. Because this wasn't about paperwork or policy anymore. It was about trust. It was about the millions of Americans who'd watched powerful men twist reality until it snapped. Crockett's voice became theirs. The voice that demanded someone finally say, "Enough." The narrator breaks in, steady and solemn. This wasn't a fight over ideology. It was a reckoning. For too long, truth had been optional. Screens across the nation flickered as the exchange began trending in real time. Hashtags formed, clips looped, and one phrase began to echo, "Finally." Someone's holding him accountable. Patel's expression hardened, his confidence beginning to chip. Every follow-up question dug deeper, peeling away layers of practiced charm. Crockett wasn't angry. She was deliberate, and that calm precision made him sweat. Because this moment wasn't really about him. It was about what he represented. A culture of immunity. A system where accountability always seemed to stop just short of power. And that's what made her next move dangerous. Not to him personally, but to the myth he embodied. The narrator's tone sharpens. What she asked wasn't just about him. It was about every American who's ever been lied to. Every voter who's been told their voice doesn't matter. Every worker who's watched leaders break promises without consequence. The stakes were no longer political. They were moral. In the crowd, even Patel's aides could feel the shift. The game had changed. The cameras were no longer recording a hearing. They were recording a moment that would live far beyond it. And just as the tension reached its peak, Crockett glanced down at her notes, her hands steady, her voice low. "Let's start," she said. The room went still again. The same electric stillness that comes before a thunderclap. Narrator, But to understand why Patel flinched, we have to look at the man behind the microphone. Before the silence of that hearing room, before the cameras and the viral moment, there was a man who had learned to move through Washington like a storm in a tailored suit. Kash Patel didn't start powerful. He became powerful by understanding how to orbit it. Fresh out of law school, Patel was sharp, ambitious, and charming in the way only men who know they're destined for attention can be. He joined government service with a lawyer's precision and a showman's flair. Colleagues described him as unshakable, strategic, always 3 steps ahead. What they meant was, he knew how to read power, how to mimic it, how to feed it. And soon, power noticed him. Patel found himself in the inner circle, first as an aide, then as an investigator, then as a trusted figure whispering in the right ears. He learned quickly that in Washington, truth wasn't always the currency. Loyalty was, and he spent it wisely. He'd sit in hearings, the youngest man in the room, tapping his pen as older officials fumbled their words. "You've got to control the narrative," he once told a colleague, smirking over coffee. "If you don't, someone else will." The line would follow him through his career. It became his quiet mantra. Television producers loved him. Well-spoken, confident, unbothered by criticism. The camera loved his grin, the way he could shrug off a pointed question with a practiced laugh. When asked on air about allegations of political bias, he quipped, "Bias? The only bias I have is for the truth." The studio audience laughed, not realizing how carefully that answer had been rehearsed. With every appearance, his legend grew. He became the man who could say anything and walk away untouched. His interviews were polished performances. Crisp suit, American flag pin perfectly aligned, voice dipped in calm defiance. Critics accused him of manipulating facts. Supporters called him fearless. Patel leaned into both labels. The higher he climbed, the less he listened. Oversight hearings became, to him, inconveniences, rituals to be endured. He'd stare down questioners with a look that said, "Are you done yet?" He'd correct senior members mid-sentence, challenge their motives, and leave reporters shaking their heads. In his mind, it wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. Control the tone, he'd tell his staff. Never let them see you react. But arrogance has a way of mistaking attention for respect. Behind the polished surface, cracks began to form. Whispers of contradictory statements. Investigations that suddenly lost traction. Documents that went missing between hands. Nothing proven. Nothing that stuck. Yet the pattern was clear. When accountability approached, Patel was already 3 moves ahead. He'd built an empire of plausible deniability. Every answer just vague enough. Every document just delayed enough. When confronted by journalists about inconsistency, he'd smirk. If you're confused, he'd say, that's because you're not reading carefully. Confidence had mutated into contempt, and Washington noticed, not the powerful. He still had their protection, but the public. The voters, the analysts, the watchdogs. People began to see through the performance. They saw the grin not as charm, but as armor. The narrator's voice lowers. There's a difference between being untouchable and believing you're untouchable. Clips flash. Patel waving off tough questions, dismissing ethical concerns, spinning contradictions into wordplay. His tone always the same, smooth, superior, amused. To his critics, he was a master manipulator. To himself, he was untouchable. But even masters have blind spots. Patel's came from believing the show would never end, that every hearing was another stage, every opponent another actor playing their part. He didn't realize that one day he'd face someone who wasn't performing, someone who didn't fear the silence, or the cameras, or the power in his name. And so, when he entered that hearing room, he carried the same air he always had, chin high, smile, confident, eyes scanning the crowd as though he already knew how this would play out. The narrator continues, calm and deliberate. For years, he never faced a question he couldn't sidestep, until today. Cut to an image of Patel at the witness table, papers neatly stacked, fingers steepled. His reflection glints on the polished wood, 2 versions of the same man, one controlled, one uncertain. The illusion of command begins to tremble, because in this story, power meets its reckoning not in grand scandals or secret leaks, but in the stillness of a single question. Asked by someone who refused to look away, the camera lingers on Patel's composed smile, just a little too tight this time. Narrator, with a measured pause. But while Patel built his career on control, his opponent's path was built on resilience, before the cameras ever found her. Jasmine Crockett was already fighting battles that never made the news. She wasn't born into privilege or power. She came from the kind of neighborhood where people worked double shifts and prayed their cars would start in the morning, where justice was something you hoped for, not something you could afford. Her mother was a teacher, her father a mechanic. And from them she learned 2 things, the value of hard work, and the pain of being unheard. She carried those lessons into adulthood like armor. When she got to law school, it wasn't through legacy or luck. It was through grit, late nights studying, part-time jobs to cover tuition, and an unshakable belief that she could make the system better. Every closed door, every condescending smile from professors who doubted her, only sharpened her resolve. If justice won't open the door, she'd once said, I'll kick it down myself. And she did. After law school, Crockett became a public defender, not because it was easy, but because it was right. She stood beside the accused, who couldn't afford high-priced lawyers, people society had already written off. In the flickering lights of county courtrooms, she fought for them. Day after day, case after case, she argued not just for verdicts, but for dignity. There were moments when she wanted to walk away. Nights when the system felt too big, too corrupt, too indifferent. But every time, she'd look at her clients, see the fear in their eyes, and remember why she started. Justice isn't partisan, she would say. It's personal. That belief became her compass. When she entered politics, she didn't trade her conviction for comfort. She carried her courtroom fire into Congress. The same precision, the same refusal to be intimidated. But this arena was different. The stakes were higher. The opposition was louder. Power didn't just whisper here. It roared. Still, Crockett never flinched. In committee rooms lined with portraits of men who'd underestimated her, she made her mark. Calm, sharp, unapologetically direct. While others performed for cameras, she dissected lies with surgical precision. While they raised their voices, she raised the truth. There's a story her colleagues tell about the day she took on a senior congressman who tried to belittle her during a heated session. He smirked, interrupted, tried to drown her out. She waited. Then, with the poise of a seasoned trial lawyer, she delivered a single question that silenced the room. "Sir," she said evenly, "are you afraid of being held accountable, or just of being seen?" The pause that followed was deafening. Moments like that defined her. Flashes of controlled fire, where intellect met instinct. She wasn't just arguing. She was unveiling truth, layer by layer. Her voice became a symbol for women who'd been ignored, for communities dismissed, for anyone who'd ever been told to wait their turn. But behind every act of defiance was sacrifice. The sleepless nights, the relentless scrutiny, the weight of carrying others' hopes. Some days, she admitted privately, the burden felt unbearable, but she never let it show. Because for her, public service wasn't a spotlight, it was a responsibility. Courage, she once said, isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep standing when fear starts speaking. And now, she was standing again, this time in the heart of the storm. The hearing room was packed. Cameras clicked. The air was thick with expectation. Across from her sat Kash Patel, a man who'd built his career on control, confidence, and calculated power. He was used to winning, used to dominating the narrative, but this wasn't his arena anymore. This was hers. Every struggle she'd endured, every late night, every courtroom defeat turned lesson, every insult she'd swallowed had led to this exact moment. A single exchange that would test everything she'd become. As she adjusted her microphone, you could almost feel the shift in the room. The steady hum of conversation fell quiet. She didn't need to shout. Her presence alone commanded attention. For years, Patel had walked through hearings unscathed, sidestepping questions, dodging accountability, smiling through scandal. But Crockett wasn't just another politician reading pre-written lines. She was a lawyer, a fighter, a truth seeker with no patience for performance. Her eyes locked on his behind that calm expression. Burned years of injustice witnessed firsthand. Every person she'd defended who didn't have the luxury of arrogance. Every time power had mocked the powerless. Every closed door she'd kicked open now. All of it converged here, in one defining question. The air crackled with tension. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if aware they were about to capture more than a political moment. They were about to witness a reckoning. This wasn't just about Patel anymore. It was about what he represented. The arrogance of unchallenged power. The ease with which men like him believed they could outtalk truth itself. And it was about her. The woman who came from nothing, who stood for everything the system tried to suppress. She leaned forward slightly, voice steady but carrying the weight of 1,000 unseen battles. The question she was about to ask would slice through the illusion Patel had built around himself. An illusion of invincibility. Now, in this hearing, the narrator's voice might say, all that fire, discipline, and truth converge in one defining question. Because in that instant, the story of Jasmine Crockett wasn't just one of resilience. It was proof that the underestimated can still bring the powerful to their knees. And when the microphones turned on, so did the storm. The hearing room hummed with the uneasy stillness that always comes before a storm. Kash Patel entered first. Confident, almost theatrical. His suit was flawless, his tie a calculated shade of power red. Cameras flashed as he took his seat, the faint smile on his face rehearsed to perfection. He'd done this before. Dozens of hearings, countless interviews. He knew how to play the room, how to charm, how to control. He leaned back, hands folded, the embodiment of composure. To the casual observer, he looked untouchable. But to those who'd been watching long enough, there was something else behind that grin. A quiet arrogance that had carried him through years of political sparring. Then came Jasmine Crockett, no entourage, no grand gestures, just purpose. She moved with the kind of calm that unnerves men like Patel, steady, focused, unshakable. When she sat down, the room seemed to realign around her. The gavel dropped, microphones flicked on, the hearing began. Patel started with confidence, his voice smooth, his words laced with well-rehearsed talking points. Every answer sounded like it had been tested in front of mirrors. "Congresswoman," he said with a half-smile, "I have already addressed that question several times in the public record." Crockett didn't blink. "Then you won't mind addressing it one more time, under oath." A faint murmur rippled through the room. Cameras clicked. A pen tapped rhythmically against a desk somewhere in the back row. Steady, sharp, like a metronome counting down to impact. Her first questions were surgical. Clean cuts designed to open the floor without drawing blood. Dates, decisions, contradictions between Patel's previous statements and the evidence before them. He parried with ease at first, throwing up walls of legal jargon and carefully vague language. But Crockett didn't flinch. Each time he dodged, she narrowed her focus. Each answer led to another question. Tighter, sharper, closer. "You said you weren't involved in that decision," she asked, flipping through a folder. "Then why does your signature appear here, next to the authorization line?" Patel's jaw tightened. The smile faltered for just a second. He adjusted his mic, laughed lightly. "Congresswoman, that document's been taken out of context." "Then give us the context," she interrupted, voice cool as glass. The shift was almost imperceptible, but everyone felt it. The control Patel had walked in with was slipping. The confident grin had become a defensive smile. His answers grew longer, his tone sharper, his interruptions more frequent. Crockett stayed composed, pen in hand, eyes locked, never raising her voice. The more he talked, the less power he had. It wasn't a shouting match. It was a slow unspooling. Reporters leaned forward. The audience stilled. Even the air seemed to thicken. Patel tried to reclaim the stage. "With all due respect, Congresswoman, your line of questioning seems focused," she offered, almost kindly. "Misguided?" he finished. "Then clarify it," she said, leaning back slightly, giving him space. The illusion of control. He took the bait. Words poured out. A tangle of explanations, self-contradictions, and half-truths. Each sentence built the trap tighter. Crockett waited. When he finally paused, she struck again. "So just to confirm," she said, tapping the pen once against the folder, "you're saying you weren't aware of those communications?" "That's correct," he replied quickly. She turned a page. "Because we have emails, time-stamped, verified, showing you not only received them, but replied directly." The room exhaled as one. Patel blinked. For the first time, he didn't have a ready answer. A low murmur rose from the back rows. One of the photographers adjusted his lens. Another's camera clicked twice in quick succession. Catching Patel's frozen expression, he cleared his throat, forced a laugh. "Congresswoman, I'm not sure that's accurate. Then you'll have a chance to explain it," she said. On record, it was a small victory, but the momentum had shifted. Every move Patel made now looked like retreat. He interrupted again, trying to regain dominance, his tone fraying at the edges. "If I could just finish my point." Crockett nodded politely. "Go ahead." He launched into a monologue, stretching one simple answer into a labyrinth of deflection. But the longer he spoke, the clearer it became. He was cornered. Crockett's expression never changed. Calm, focused. The kind of stillness that unnerves predators when they realize the hunt's been reversed by now. The hearing room was silent except for Patel's stumbling voice, the hum of the microphones, and that rhythmic tapping, her pen steady as a heartbeat. Then came the pause, the silence that says everything before words do. Crockett set her pen down. Patel glanced up, sensing something in the air. She leaned forward, a small, knowing smile playing at the corner of her mouth. And then, the narrator's voice would say. She leaned forward, smiled, and asked the question that would end it all. No script could have prepared Patel for what came next. The moment lingered like a held breath. Every camera light glared. Every microphone waited. Jasmine Crockett leaned in, eyes locked on Kash Patel, steady, unblinking, calm as a surgeon about to make the first cut. "Mr. Patel," she said softly, voice slicing through the air, "you've testified that you value truth, correct?" He nodded, too quickly. "Of course." "Then help me understand something," she continued, sliding a document toward him. "If truth matters, why did you approve a report that even your own staff flagged as factually inconsistent?" The room froze. You could almost hear the word echo, inconsistent. Patel blinked once, twice. His jaw tightened. "Congresswoman, that's not an accurate characterization." She didn't let him finish. "It's your language," she said. "It's written right here, under your signature. Factually inconsistent." He shifted in his seat, the perfect posture from earlier now dissolving into something almost human. "Discomfort." The narrator's voice broke in, low and deliberate. It wasn't just a question. It was a mirror, one that showed, for the first time, what power looks like when stripped of its confidence. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The question had already landed, and now the silence did the rest. Every journalist in the room leaned forward. Camera shutters began to stutter like nervous heartbeats. Patel stared at the page as though willing the ink to rearrange itself. "Congresswoman," he began, "there's more to that context." "What context?" she asked. "The The context where truth bends if it benefits the powerful. He opened his mouth again, then closed it. The kind of pause that ends careers. Tweet flashes across the screen. At RealDemWatch, Crockett just ended him. Hashtag truth overspin. Hashtag Crockett wins. He tried again. Voice thinner now. I think you're misunderstanding my role in that review. Crockett tilted her head. Your signature doesn't misunderstand. It certifies. The words hit like slow motion punches. Controlled, deliberate, perfectly placed. The narrator again. For years, Patel had mastered the art of evasion. But this wasn't a pundit panel or a friendly interview. This was accountability, and it had a voice. Patel looked around, searching for allies among the faces behind the dais. None looked back. Even his own aides had gone still. Crockett flipped another page. You claim you weren't informed of the misrepresentations in that report. Yet here's an internal memo, dated 3 days before publication, addressed to your office. Initialed by you. The room exhaled. A beat of silence followed by the faint hum of tension so sharp it almost sang. Patel leaned forward, the smoothness gone from his tone. Congresswoman, I don't recall that document. Convenient, she said, but your initials seem to. He blinked again. The clock above the chamber ticked audibly, cruelly slow. Another flash of imagined reactions. At Patriot News, Patel getting roasted live. He's sweating. At Justice for All, she's giving a masterclass in calm power. Hashtag integrity matters. Crockett let the silence breathe. That long, merciless pause that only the confident know how to use. She waited until the sound of his shallow breath filled the speakers. Mr. Patel, she said finally, are you under oath? He hesitated. Yes. Then you understand what perjury is. His throat moved, but no words came out. Good, she said quietly, because the American people deserve honesty, not clever word games, not political theater, just the truth. The narrator's tone deepened. In that instant, the hearing stopped being a hearing. It became a reckoning, not just for one man, but for every moment arrogance mistook itself for immunity. The camera zoomed in on Patel's face, the faint sheen of sweat, the tremor in his jaw. His smile was gone. His words too. Reporters exchanged glances. One whispered, he's done. Crockett picked up the same folder he had dismissed earlier and held it open for the room. Let the record show, she said, that this document, bearing Mr. Patel's initials, directly contradicts his sworn testimony. Boom, the sound of truth landing. Not loud, but final. Patel tried to recover. If I may, Congresswoman, you've had your say, she replied. Now, let the facts speak. For the first time, applause rippled from the back rows, quiet, hesitant, but undeniable. The gavel struck once. Order, the chair called, but it was too late. The viral moment had already been born. Oberly, at BREAKING, POINT, TV. Crockett destroys Patel with one question he can't answer. Watch it. Feel it. Hashtag Crockett wins. Hashtag accountability day. Patel sat there, his practiced calm disintegrating, words stumbling into fragments. I think, what I meant was, Crockett didn't look at him anymore. She addressed the room. Mr. Patel's testimony reminds us why oversight matters, she said, because truth doesn't defend itself. People do. She closed her folder with the soft click of finality. The sound echoed louder than the gavel. The narrator cut in again, and just like that, years of crafted narrative fell apart under the weight of one calm voice. Camera pans, aides whispering, journalists scribbling, flashes of disbelief. Patel slumped slightly in his chair, eyes down. The performance was over. The silence around him wasn't respect anymore. It was judgment. Tweet overlay. At Citizen Report, this is why we elect fighters. Crockett didn't just question him, she exposed him. At Media Pulse. That silence after her question, that's accountability in its purest form. Crockett looked toward the audience, her tone steady but now carrying an undercurrent of something deeper, something human. This isn't about politics, she said. It's about promises. The ones made to the people who still believe this country stands for truth. Every word landed like a pulse. Patel sat frozen, eyes distant, hands clasped tight. There were no more words to hide behind. Crockett gathered her papers, stood, and delivered the final line. Quiet, deliberate, unforgettable. When you build your power on deception, she said, the truth doesn't just catch up. It walks right in the front door and calls you by name. The room went silent. The cameras rolled. For a heartbeat, it felt like history had paused. Final overlay flashes across the screen. Hashtag Crockett wins. Hashtag truth overspin. Hashtag moment of clarity. The narrator's voice returned. Softer now, almost reverent. It wasn't the volume of her voice that silenced the room. It was the weight of her integrity. And while Patel struggled to find words, America found something else. Its reflection. The gavel struck again, marking the end of the hearing. But the story, her story, was only beginning to ripple outward, and just before the screen cut to black, the narrator whispered the cliffhanger, but the real shock came after the cameras stopped rolling. Within hours, the internet exploded. The next morning, the world woke up to a storm. The clip, 28 seconds long, had already crossed 4 million views before sunrise. By mid-morning, it was everywhere. reposted, remixed, on every feed, every timeline, every corner of the internet where people had long grown weary of being lied to. The thumbnail froze on Patel's blank stare. The exact moment his composure cracked. The title beneath it read, "Crockett destroys Kash Patel with one question he can't answer." And for once, the internet agreed on something. Tweet from @TruthSeeker87. She said what every decent American wanted to say. No yelling, no drama, just truth. #Crockett wins TikTok caption. That pause was louder than any speech this week. Reddit comment. This is how accountability looks when it wears heels and keeps receipts. Cable news caught the scent before noon. Every major network aired the clip, dissecting every pause, every flicker of Patel's face. Some anchors called it a masterclass in composure. Others labeled it a rare moment of political honesty in a sea of performance. The narrator's voice cut through the montage like an anchor in the noise. For years, hearings had become theater, rehearsed outrage and empty sound. But this felt different. This felt real. On late-night shows, comedians replayed the moment. Patel's silence looped again and again, each time earning a fresh wave of laughter and applause. Jimmy Kimmel quipped, "That pause? That was the sound of every spin doctor in DC deleting their talking points." Trevor Noah smiled into the camera. "You know it's bad when silence goes viral." Across podcasts and political channels, voices collided. "She didn't just expose one man," one host said. "She reminded America that accountability doesn't need to scream, it just needs to stand." But on the other side of the spectrum, Patel's defenders scrambled. Press statements trickled out within hours. Words like context, misrepresentation, and bias littered the airwaves. He appeared on a friendly network that evening, visibly shaken, trying to rewrite the story. "It was a misunderstanding," he said, his voice too quick, his eyes darting. The host nodded sympathetically. But even then, the Chiron below him betrayed the truth. Patel faces backlash after heated exchange. The narrator returned, quieter now. For the first time, power didn't control the narrative. The people did. The numbers spoke louder than any press release. By the end of the day, hashtags like #Crockett wins, #truth over spin, and #integrity matters had trended in multiple countries. A clip of her final line, "The truth doesn't just catch up, it walks right in the front door," was stitched into montages of protest, chants, classrooms, and family dinner conversations. One viral TikTok showed a teenage girl telling her mom, "That's what standing your ground looks like." Another, a veteran watching the clip and whispering, "Finally." Crockett herself stayed silent that day. No tweets, no interviews. Just one post on her feed that read, "Accountability isn't about winning. It's about reminding people that honesty still matters." Comment below her post, "You reminded us of who we are." Another, "You didn't just speak for yourself, you spoke for all of us." Meanwhile, Patel's office lights stayed on late, aides circled, phones buzzed, statements were drafted and read, but the internet had already chosen its narrative, and it wasn't his. The next morning, newspapers carried headlines that echoed the mood of a nation rediscovering its moral compass. The pause that shook Capitol Hill. Jasmine Crockett redefines political courage. The narrator's voice carried over images of new scrolling timelines and city lights glowing in the early dawn. Sometimes, a single question can do what entire systems fail to: make people believe again. By week's end, the clip had surpassed 50 million views. Memes turned into movements, hashtags into discussions, disbelief into belief. Teachers played it in civics classes. Churches referenced it in sermons. Activists quoted it in rallies. Crockett's.com defiance became a symbol, not of partisanship, but of dignity, reclaimed. In one viral tweet a user wrote, "She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard." And beneath the applause, beyond the trending tags, there was something deeper. Something that couldn't be measured in likes or shares. A quiet pride. A validation long overdue for those who had felt unseen. The narrator's tone softened, almost intimate now. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about revelation. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't roar, it resonates. The montage slows. Crockett walking out of the hearing room, files in hand, the noise fading behind her. Patel staring at his empty notes. The American flag in the background, not as a symbol of power, but of promise. The screen darkens, and a single line fades in. But beneath the noise, one question still echoed across America, and that's where this story becomes more than a clash. It becomes a lesson. The cameras were gone now. The echo of applause, both literal and digital, had faded into a hum. What remained in that silent congressional chamber was not noise, not spectacle, but something far rarer: clarity. Jasmine Crockett sat for a moment after the hearing adjourned, staring at the empty seats where, just hours ago, history had unfolded. The pen she had used, the same one that tapped rhythmically as Patel unraveled, lay still beside her notes. In the quiet, she allowed herself a single deep breath, not of victory, but of validation. This wasn't about winning an argument. It never had been. It was about truth, that elusive, if unpolished force, that still, somehow, found a way to cut through the noise of politics and performance. Crockett had not come to humiliate or grandstand. She came to remind everyone watching that truth still matters, even when it's inconvenient. And as she walked out of that hearing room, the world outside was already changing. The narrator's voice enters softly, almost reverent. What Jasmine Crockett proved that day wasn't that she was smarter, louder, or more prepared, though she was all of those things. What she proved was that integrity doesn't need volume. It just needs courage. The replay clips, now looping endlessly online, weren't about her tone or her gestures. They were about the moment when someone chose principle over performance, in a landscape flooded with sound bites and partisan theater. Crockett's composure became a quiet revolution. She didn't just expose a contradiction, she exposed a culture of evasion, and reminded everyone that truth, when spoken calmly and precisely, has more power than any headline ever could. Reporters later asked her how she stayed so composed while Patel deflected and derailed. Her answer was simple, because when you know the truth, she said, you don't have to chase it, you just have to stand with it. That sentence, clipped.com, and unshakably confident, spread nearly as fast as her takedown itself. Teachers quoted it in classrooms. Commentators replayed it on morning shows. It was printed on t-shirts, stitched into memes, and whispered like a mantra for everyone who had ever been silenced by power. It became more than a political moment. It became a mirror in the weeks that followed. The viral clip faded from trending lists. But its message didn't. It seeped into workplaces, schools, dinner tables, anywhere people had to decide between convenience and conviction. And slowly, something beautiful began to happen. People started speaking up, not with anger, not for attention, but with calm conviction, like Crockett had. They began asking their own defining questions in their own lives, to bosses, to institutions, to themselves. Because her story wasn't just about politics. It was about the courage to ask what others avoid. As the narrator's tone deepens, the words linger like an echo through time. In the end, every society faces its own hearings. Some happen on camera, others in quiet moments when no one is watching. But the question remains the same. Will we tell the truth, or will we perform around it? That, Crockett understood, was the real test. She hadn't just defended a point, she had defended the principle that democracy itself depends on. Accountability. The final montage rolls. A janitor turns off the lights in the hearing room. A mother watches the viral clip while helping her daughter with homework. A college debate team studies Crockett's tone, the precision, the patience, the power. And somewhere, Patel sits behind a desk, silent, scrolling through the reactions, not defeated, but perhaps quietly changed, because truth doesn't just destroy, it transforms. The narrator concludes, voice steady and sure, because in every hearing, every household, and every heart, integrity still matters. And though truth may take its time, it never loses the argument. The screen fades back to that defining moment. Crockett leaning forward, eyes steady, voice unwavering. The question echoes once more, not as confrontation, but as a challenge to everyone watching. One question changed everything, because it didn't just expose a lie, it reminded us who we are. The narrator's tone softens, wrapping the story in a calm, powerful stillness. That moment wasn't about winning a debate or trending online. It was about remembering that truth, real, unshakable truth, still belongs in our conversations, our politics, and our lives. Clips flash again. The silence after her question, the stunned faces, the ripple of realization, then fade into faces across America. Teachers, workers, parents, students, people watching, nodding, thinking. It's not about sides, the narrator continues. It's about standards. The kind we set when we decide that honesty matters more than headlines, and that courage, even quiet courage, can still move a nation. The camera pans upward from the empty hearing table to the American flag gently swaying behind it, not as a backdrop, but as a reminder. Because democracy isn't built on perfection. It's built on people willing to ask hard questions and listen for the truth. Beat of silence. Then, the narrator's final words. If you believe truth still has a place in American discourse, share this story, subscribe, and stand for dignity. Not for a party, not for a headline, but for what's right. The music swells, soft, hopeful, resolute.